Welcome to Reclaiming Me, a trauma-informed podcast helping women with complex PTSD heal the lasting impact of childhood attachment wounds from parents and caregivers, so you can finally release people-pleasing and perfectionism and learn to trust in relationships, beginning with the one you have with yourself. I'm your host, Cindy Payne, therapist, trauma specialist, and a woman who has walked this path both personally and professionally.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to your Midweek Reframe. On Monday, if you tuned in, you will know that we looked at the architecture of boundaries through a trauma-informed lens, and we talked about the reality of what happens when we start building structural limits in our lives. We looked at how difficult people will often push back against those lines and how our own inner critic will try to use guilt, sometimes shame, to make us take the doors back down. But right around Wednesday, it's a really specific type of frustration that usually creeps in. It's midweek, we're getting tired. You try to set a limit with a coworker or a loved one, or you try to say no to a family dynamic that really drains you, but it doesn't go so well. Maybe your voice shook. Maybe you stumbled over your words. Or maybe you just spent the next 3 hours overthinking exactly how you said it, wishing you had handled it with this absolute Zen-like calm. Can you tell that this is familiar to me? Your mind tells you that because it felt uncomfortable or because it did not go off perfectly, then that means that you must have just completely screwed it up. And as a result of this, maybe you start believing that you're just not cut out for this work and it's just easier to go back to the people pleasing because, well, at least that is familiar. But before you do that, I want us to completely shatter that expectation of perfectionism that I talked about in Monday's full length episode. I want you to drop your shoulders. I want you to take a deep breath. And I want you to replace that pressure with a new focus. And that new focus is this: good boundaries, not perfect ones. There is this highly unrealistic image in the wellness world today that a healthy boundary looks like standing in total, unshakable confidence, delivering this flawless line while the other person in the room just peacefully accepts it. But for a trauma survivor, and especially a trauma survivor who has had extensive relational trauma, that is almost never what it feels like. So let me give you the real picture. We try to step away from being porous screen doors, and our nervous system goes, whoa, and then it overcorrects because we are terrified of letting everything leak in. And then we suddenly build a brick wall that may feel incredibly rigid or cold or defensive. And so we kind of vacillate between porous and rigid. And the moment we see the other person's discomfort, here comes the guilt and here comes the shame. And our system does this thing where it wants to collapse right back into being porous again. A good boundary, though, is often really freaking terrifying, and it's allowed to be clunky. It looks like setting a limit while your knees are knocking together under the table, your heart is beating at 120 beats per minute. It looks like sending an email to protect your capacity while your throat just constricts. It looks like holding your ground even when the room just feels so incredibly heavy with someone's discomfort. And when you feel that heavy wave of guilt or shame or panic after drawing a line this week, I invite you to notice if that old protector of resentment tries to slip back in and take over. She's sneaky. Your system might want to default back to being really pissed off at the other person just to avoid the raw vulnerability of a shaking no. But here's where I really want you to remember how Prentice Hemphill reframes this for us. A boundary is the distance at which I can love you and love me simultaneously. So we're talking about proximity. We're talking about being able to change the proximity in which we show up in relationship to the other person. So we don't need a fiery, rigid wall to keep people out anymore. And we don't need to let our space stay completely porous just to keep them happy. A boundary does not have to be this beautifully executed process to be incredibly effective. If it keeps you from abandoning yourself, then it's a good boundary. Even if it's clunky, even if your walls went up a little too fast, and even if you have to go sit in your car and take a few deep breaths to settle your nervous system, then I consider C plus effort getting the job done. So, as you move through the rest of this week, I want you to give yourself explicit permission to set messy boundaries. So please, please, please stop waiting for the perfect moment when the fear just completely leaves your body, because your nervous system has years of conditioning telling it that keeping your boundaries down is the only way to stay safe. So a clunky, slightly rigid boundary is still a massive victory over self-abandonment. Remember that trauma is stored in the body and the fear is just an old memory. That's all. It isn't a reflection of your current strength. So when you feel the need to protect your space this week, don't worry about getting the presentation flawless. Just focus on keeping the line honest and protective of your capacity. And know this, that every time you choose a good, imperfect boundary over a perfect act of people pleasing, what you're doing is you are reinforcing this architecture of your own life. You are proving to your body that you can handle this temporary discomfort of the boundary in order to secure your long-term peace. So, once again, loosen your jaw, let your stomach soften, and remember that you don't need to do this perfectly to be entirely worthy of the space that you take up. So thank you for tuning in to this brief midweek reframe. May you go forward with your boundaries intact, as messy as it feels, and know that you are doing great work. And I look forward to seeing you back here next week for another full-length episode. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for spending this time with me today. I hope you leave feeling a little lighter, a little more grounded, and a little closer to trusting yourself and your inner experience. If this episode resonated with you, please follow or subscribe so future conversations can meet you when they're needed. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, consider sharing this episode with them. That's one of the ways this work reaches the people who need it the most. You can find me on Instagram at Cindy Payne Rooted, and you can also visit me at cindypayne.com, where you'll find all episode links, blog posts, practice updates, and a free people-pleasing style quiz designed to help you notice your patterns with more compassion. And remember, every small step towards healing, self-trust, and presence matters. You are worthy of this journey. Thanks, everyone.